is the island of Meru. It's one of 600 or so small islands that form the West Indies group known as the Grenadines. 150 people live here in Meru, in what is in many respects a paradise island, with its Atlantic breakers, its golden and empty beaches, and its lush green foliage. The waters around Meru teem with fish, though I must painfully add some of them are jellyfish. Paradoxically, the one thing that Meru lacks is water. Fresh water, that is. There's none of it, or none at least that's easily accessible.
For the little group which arrives at Meru from Barbados, it's been an idyllic journey. 2 aeroplane hops over the Grenadine Islands, followed by a boat trip across coral reefs from Palm Island, 5 miles distant. But this is no tourist joyride. These people have come here on business. Business which could mean the difference between Meru surviving as a living community and total evacuation. Scientists from Canada and development workers from Barbados, they've come to look for water. The quest for water is a daily business for the 50 families of Meru, and at present there's only one way of getting it, carrying it by hand or head. Every drop that's used for drinking or washing has to be carried 200 feet up to the village from the spring below. Now, through the work of the development agency, a large trap to collect the water has been built. For 2 or 3 months a year it rains. Then this large catchment area collects the falling rain and directs it downwards to a giant tank at the bottom. The tank is now supplying 1.5 gallons of water per person per day. While this represents some improvement on the past, it's still not nearly enough. They had hoped it might have been possible to use seawater and by installing a desalination plant make it drinkable. The Canadian experts have shown that the cost of this would be exorbitant, so they re-examined the siting of a well. Back at his headquarters in Bridgetown, Barbados, Reverend Andrew Hatch, Anglican minister and development officer, reports back to his team. The next stage is to prospect for water underground. For the last week, a Canadian geologist has been surveying the island for a suitable borehole. His findings have been encouraging.
There at the east end of the church. And perhaps what is even more significant than seeing what has already been achieved is the fact that we see that there's a water trace here. Well, at the moment it's dry, but with the lie of the land here, there's the possibility of water in that area.
Yeah, well, this is the north of the island, however, and when we were last there, we identified a spot here.
Hatch and his team are staff members of CADEC, Christian Action for Development in the Caribbean. The CADEC office in Bridgetown is directed by a West Indian Anglican and housed in the wing of a novitiate of Catholic Ursuline nuns. The 3 presidents of CADEC are a Catholic archbishop from Jamaica, a Methodist minister from Belize, and a Presbyterian housewife from Trinidad. CADEC is unique as a church development agency in that it is totally interdenominational. Official representatives of the Catholic, Anglican, Methodist and Presbyterian churches forming the bulk of its members. CADEC is also unique in being one of the few West Indian organizations which unites Caribbean islands from Tobago to Jamaica. The man whose drive and political acumen has given CADEC the importance it has in the West Indian development scene is a dynamic former Trinidadian senator, Reverend Roy Nihal. Nihal believes that aid from overseas should be allocated by the local people. I asked him why.
Well, I think there are 2 reasons. First of all, we think that we have developed here in the Caribbean, in the non-governmental agencies, voluntary agencies, and specifically the churches, sufficient experience and expertise to vet projects that are submitted by organizations and groups. And secondly, because we feel that very definitely within the fellowship of the Christian community, there's got to be a large element of trust, and that we are able to produce better results if we can undertake on the basis of our criteria to let the agencies know abroad what we think should be funded. And to handle the money, of course, saves an awful lot of red tape, etc., and we can get to projects much faster.
With Lawson Nurse, CADEC Development Officer in Barbados, I visited the farm of Mr. Freddie Holder. In 1974, there was an epidemic of swine fever in Barbados. Freddie Holder's entire herd was devastated. He came to Caddick for help to restock. Caddick suggested that if Mr. Holder were prepared to set up a cooperative, sharing his knowledge and experience with other farmers, they would support him.
Well, at the moment, about 80 or 85% of all the food consumed in Barbados is imported. And we feel that lots of this food can be grown and produced here if the people will only make the effort. And pig rearing is one area because we import about $3 million in ham alone every year. And therefore, we see this as one possibility for import substitution.
How can you really ensure that there is some educational process taking place here?
Yes, our people have a terrible, what we might call, dependency syndrome. And this is because of the fact that we're coming out of a colonial situation in which people were accustomed to having things done for them or being told to do this and do that. So there's a terrible lack of motivation. And we believe that any project which would create self-reliance, independence, and self-awareness would be one which is worthwhile.
Are you sure, though, that you're not, in fact, supporting lazy farmers or totally inefficient businessmen?
We can't be sure, but what we would at least try to do is that we're basically talking about community groups. This doesn't exclude the support of an individual from time to time. For example, our solar dynamics enterprise in Barbados, which tends to be, if not an individual, but it is an individual with profit sharing built in. But generally speaking, we're talking about small community groups. We do try to assess whether they have a group cohesion, whether they have some vision of what they want to do, and of course whether they're willing to get up off their seats and do it, because no more than you are we interested in supporting lazy people. We've got plenty of these already.
Jimmy Husbands had a hot shower before coming to work this morning. The water heating was free. It was done by the sun.
What we do is we take cold water into our flat plate collector, which in turn, by taking the radiation, and transfers the heat from the plate onto the series of pipes. And as the water is heated, it rises and comes into our storage tank. And at the same time, the cold water, which is heavier, gravitates to the absorber panel. So we have this constant recirculation of water, which produces a good temperature during the average day.
Jimmy Husbands, managing director of Solar Dynamics, works with a small, hand-picked group of craftsmen perfecting the design of his solar heaters. At present they cost £400 each, but with the help of an $8,000 loan from Caddick, he reckons he can reduce this cost by at least a third using an improved design. Husbands is more than just a businessman. He sees the harnessing of solar energy as having an important part to play in the development of the Caribbean.
Caddick is involved in changing things in the Caribbean. Certainly our richest resource in the Caribbean area, after our own people, is the sun. We have an abundance of it here. Now, if we are going to be involved in long-term planning, if we're going to be involved in helping people, then we should see this as one of the priority areas of using this sun which we have, using one of our best resources to help our own people in the Caribbean and others. Now, for years we've been importing other forms of water heating units, which have only been consuming fossil-based fuels which we brought in from other countries. And this has been causing great exportation of earnings for just heating water. Well, we've got a lot of sun, and we've got 3 youngsters who are interested in this project and who have talent, and they feel that because of these 2 factors merged together, there is great justification for Caddick giving us money to put this project on the road.
Building contractors are becoming interested in the possibilities of solar heating. The heating unit may look somewhat ungainly outside a new house, but that doesn't worry Husbands. He regards it as a useful advertisement. With many new houses going up in Barbados, solar dynamics could soon be an economic proposition. and Jimmy Husbands will be able to repay his Caddick loan. Meanwhile, Solar Dynamics won't have to rely only on the sun for energy. Its managing director is pretty dynamic too.
The thing that has brought the Caribbean ecumenical people together is a concern for development. This is a question of what does the gospel, what does our Lord Jesus Christ mean in the Caribbean? And what we find is that those of us in any church concerned about that have an immediate response from people in other churches concerned about the same kind of things, whether they're Roman Catholics or Presbyterians or Methodists or whatever. And the real problem is not across denominational lines, but with people in our own churches who are not concerned about the development of the Caribbean. What does Christ mean in the Caribbean? And the whole framework is quite different from the traditional European one.
Fishing has been a traditional means of livelihood in the island of Montserrat, inshore fishing using small boats. But the waters close to the shore have been overfished, and poachers using dynamite in recent years have destroyed the spawning beds. So what was needed was larger boats, boats that could stay out for days at a time, could take bigger crews and fish the Caribbean Sea using deep trawls.
Let us pray. O God, the Father of all the families of the earth, we humbly beseech thee on behalf of this boat, Patricia, and of all who shall sail hereon, that it may please thee to bless and hallow this boat and to fill it with thy good.
When George Edwards, Presbyterian elder, blesses the latest addition to the Montserrat fleet, he does so with some pride. 3 years ago, the Christian Council of Montserrat, under George Edwards' direction, pushed for the building of larger boats for the island. In Montserrat, they had the skills to build, and in the nearby forests, the materials. What they lacked was a blueprint and working drawings for a boat of this size. So they asked Caddick for help. Caddick, through its overseas contacts, got plans from Germany, and skipper Dyer, with the help of his crew, cut the trees on the hillside behind Isles Bay and built to the German design. Caddick brings to the Caribbean ideas, resources and technical skills from many different countries, including Ireland. The Irish Bishops' Fund Trochera has given £30,000 over the past 3 years. Because of this help, skipper Dyer will soon be able to abandon primitive fishing methods of the past and embark on deep-sea trawling. Caddick has also supplied him with a 40-horsepower diesel and a refrigerator to store his catch. Mr. Dyer's new fishing boat is the pride of the Montserrat fleet.
The Trochera grant is put together in the Caddick Development Fund with the contributions of the local churches and the contributions of a number of churches in various parts of the North Atlantic countries. The Caddick Development Fund, therefore, which includes the Trochera grant, is an attempt to use our own resources, linked up with the resources of others who share with us, in order to do those things that would be basically of help to the poorest people of the Caribbean.
The earthquake which hit the island of Antigua in 1974 destroyed his stone ovens and made baker Christopher Richardson one of the poorest people of the Caribbean. Mr. Richardson called on Caddick, and now, thanks to a small grant, the smell of freshly baked bread once again attracts customers to the Richardson bakery. Caddick is not a disaster fund, but being locally based, it is flexible, not hidebound by restrictions, not even by prison walls. When prisoner Williams was put inside the penitentiary at St. John's, Antigua, he didn't want his time behind bars to be totally unproductive. Neither did Caddick. So with approval of the prison authorities, Caddick gave prisoner Williams money and professional advice to run a small rabbit and duck farm right in the centre of the prison compound. Prisoner Williams' enthusiasm and success attracts the interest of the prison officers, but Caddick hopes his success will encourage community groups in other backward areas of the Caribbean to develop rabbit rearing in the hope of raising the protein count in their diet. The experience of Mr. Williams in conditions hardly ideal could be a useful guideline.
We've been brought up to believe that there are certain universal principles that must not be challenged. For instance, But the church must always be supporters of the status quo, as it was in the old colonial days. We've got to emerge from this colonial era. We've got to express our own understanding of the gospel. We've got to have an opportunity to put that expression in terms of our music in the churches, in terms of our liturgy, in terms of our theology. And we're also claiming now that we do want to be able to say that there are certain peculiarities about Caribbean Christianity and church life.
Castle Bruce Farm is a 1,500-acre fruit plantation on the fertile island of Dominica. When the Castle Bruce farm workers admire their new tractor, they do so with a special pride. It's not the boss's tractor, it's theirs. 4 years ago, Castle Bruce was owned by the Commonwealth Development Organisation. But when they tried to lay off some of the workers in an economy drive, the result was a strike. The owners sold out, and with government help and a massive grant from CADEC, the workers took over the running of the farm. So now, when the workers set out each morning to clear the undergrowth and cultivate limes and bananas, they're working their own land. But it's one thing to farm the land, another to market the produce. Some local planters, alarmed at the success of the co-op, have tried to edge them out of the market.
Try to raise the price in different areas, or in the very areas where I used to get produce from the farmers.
The price is really a price war, right? Because different people are buying at different...
But even if there are problems, there's also a new confidence to face these problems and to crack them.
Sun is hot while it's going down.
Farming in the West Indies had been bedeviled by two extremes. The great plantation herded its employees as chattels and denied them the ability to develop themselves. The plantation experience reinforced laziness, irresponsibility, the servile mentality. But small peasant farms weren't the solution either. Inaccessible and underfinanced, their level of production was low and satisfactory marketing impossible. Castle Bruce Farm belongs to the 100 workers of the co-op. They are working for themselves, and they enjoy it. But they know that there's a need for sacrifice from everyone in the early stages of the farm in order to ensure its long-term success. So they've all agreed to work for wages much below what they would have tolerated under the old system, now accepting less than £3 a week. They're also allowed wages in kind, and in a climate where banana is the staple food, this helps. Castle Bruce has a long way to go, but much has already been achieved, as farm manager Atherton Martin is well aware.
Well, we have to see the Castle Bruce Cooperative as an effort mainly in social and political transformation. And if we understand the cooperative in this framework, the whole farm operation and the whole process through which we are going assumes a lot more significance. You have to understand the people here in this part of the country are coming out of a plantation experience. They're coming out of a situation where they always worked collectively, together, but they worked for somebody else. This is the plantation experience that has been, very well documented over the last several years. The point is, how does one use that experience of a plantation life to generate self-reliance, to generate, in fact, the exact opposite of what was being generated by the estate experience? Well, one of the answers that we find and that we are working on is that we have to thrust ourselves into a situation where we are dependent, in fact, upon our own resources, our own decision-making. In other words, we believe that we must learn self-reliance by practicing self-reliance. So we thrust ourselves into a cooperative situation where we can't pass the buck to anyone. The buck stops with all of us. Collectively, we have to make decisions. We have to work.
The Castle Bruce workers are encouraged to think while they work, to argue, to discuss, and be interested in everything that's going on at the farm and what part each of them has in it. While working, they learn. CADEC regards the educational aspects of Castle Bruce as of major importance. 70% of the people of the West Indies live in rural areas. Education in farming and horticulture has an obvious importance. But the Castle Bruce experiment could mean the beginning of a whole new social order in rural areas of the West Indies. Here in the co-op, they may be blazing a trail which could have repercussions far beyond the few hundred acres of Castle Bruce Farm, or even of the island of Dominica. This doesn't mean that all has been sweet reason since the farm went co-op. The Management Council is an open house where everything is discussed and planned. Compensation for injuries and accidents suffered on the farm is a recurring problem. They try to work it out.
I would like to know if when people hurt anywhere than the farm, if you doesn't pay them, or if it's on the farm alone to say you fall sick or you hurt on the farm, you will get paid. But if you hurt in your garden or anywhere else, if you have to pay for that.
There have been a few people who have got injured outside the farm and have got paid.
The Castle Bruce experiment is less than 2 years old. It's obviously too soon to be able to forecast with confidence what its future will be. But already it has shown that among ordinary people with little education and few enough natural advantages, you can find leadership, the ability to speak in public, and the power to make decisions. Castle Bruce has shown that such people have the ability to work together for a common good when this is clearly presented to them. It's no exaggeration to say that in 2 years, these 100 people have achieved a real sense of liberation and an awareness of their own power and dignity. They have become, or are fast becoming, a community of people who know that their destiny is at least partly their own to shape. It's small wonder that CADEC regards the Castle Bruce Cooperative as the most important of all the projects they are supporting.
We believe that development is about people, and that people must develop, not only economically, but socially and culturally in terms of their very being, their cultural being. And this is the reason why we support some things that in the traditional sense would not be considered to be development.
But are specifically churchy and religious.
And, well, there are some things I think that are related very definitely to Christianity and to religion that traditionally were excluded from our understanding of religion. For instance, the steel bands that are heard so often in Trinidad were regarded as something outside of the church because they developed in the backyards of Port of Spain. And we feel that here are people who can authentically express their religious feelings with the particular music that is so natural to them. This is the reason why we support things as the steel band movement.
If the Samaru Steel Jets have as their party piece a Bach suite rather than a calypso, it's not because they don't play West Indian music. In fact, while their repertoire is international, the greatest part of it is, of course, Caribbean music. But by playing 18th century German chamber music, these young musicians are showing that the steel drum is a true musical instrument, capable of something better than the noisy clatter of the Tin Pan Alley. CADEC has helped the Steel Jets to cut a long-playing record of their music. Some people might feel that this sort of activity was rather superficial to the main purpose of a development agency. But CADEC is convinced that there's more to developing people than providing them with fishing boats or farm stock. For CADEC, development means encouraging church choirs, supporting religious seminars, developing local theatre and dancing, all the things that go to make the difference between living and surviving. Abandoned oil drums are the raw material for the steel band. Softened by fire, they're carefully hammered note by note into tune. It's a good image of the work of CADEC, respectful of the natural resources of the West Indian people and building on these, not imposing an artificial structure from outside, but alert to the aspirations and potential of the local people and leading them to achievement. Irish people, through Trócaire, are contributing to that work.
Well, Trócaire's assistance has meant many things to us. First, it would have meant that it helped us to help people help themselves in project programs, but also it built our confidence because they were making assistance available to us on a basis that was not paternalistic, which we usually find with overseas donor agencies. They made the grant to our development fund, and we were allowed to make the decisions here ourselves. And therefore, we decided what were the priority areas for treatment and assistance in the Caribbean.
Now, next year we're going to have to ask the people again for money. How can you guarantee that it's, you know, a justifiable cause?
Well, we have reported to Chokora on the projects which have been funded so far. And since we have been involved only in development projects and not in welfare projects, and since we have tried to make sure that every project had possibility for continuity and that it would not become dependent on us or any other agency but would guarantee its own life through becoming viable, we are sure that Chokora will understand that this must have been a good investment.